Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue, uh, it's a flagship event organized by Usana's Foundation and the team. I would like to welcome all the participants and the speakers of the day to join us this evening session on terror financing, the life support system of terrorism. We have with us it's actually a distinguished panel, and it's an interesting topic as well. And we have got very eminent speakers who is going to share their thoughts and views and perspectives on terror financing. So we have 4 speakers, and I'm going to invite first Dr. Professor Dalbir Ahlawat to start with the session. Let me welcome once again on behalf of the team and Usana's Professor Dalbir for joining us and to share your thoughts and views on terror financing. Before that, I have a brief introduction about Professor Dalbir. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of Security Studies and Criminology, Macquarie University, Australia. His areas of specialization include Indo-Pacific security and strategic affairs, India's security challenges, India-China strategic competition, and US security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. He has published 5 books. The most recent titles include Terrorism, Security and Development in South Asia, National, Regional and Global Implications by Routledge, Australia-India Relations, Evolving Polycentric World Order in 2017, and Indo-Pacific Energy Emerging Powers, Evolving Regions and Challenges to Global Governance. In addition, he has published 40 research papers in journals and edited books. So we have indeed got an eminent person to speak on the subject on terror financing. Before I invite him, let me add a few words about the importance, the significance of this topic, the terror financing. In other words, I think this is the most important theme that the USANAS has focusing on in its annual security dialogue, which is pertinent to the life support system of the terrorism or to carry out terrorist activities. This has been focused since 9/11, but however, it got public attention or it received the public attention once we all heard about FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. Much before that, the genesis goes back to 1999 when the United Nations have come out with this resolution on suppression of terror financing in 1999, and thereafter in 2001, the UN drug and organized crime had included terrorism and the terror-related financial supporting activities and started scrutinizing that. But the FATF as an international organization caught in all the public attention, and in fact the academicians across the world, across the continent. As far as this part of the world is concerned, the South Asia, I would say, in general and India in particular, we have seen this impact of this the global action on this terror financing, particularly through these intergovernmental organizations called FATF, and as a result that we could see some sort of behavioral change from our the most what do you call that, the terror support mechanism and the system in our neighborhood. With this introduction, I think this is a very important topic for the policymakers as well as the academicians to look into it, particularly when we are in the cusp of moving into a digital financial setup and system, like and moving to the digital transactions like bitcoins and cryptocurrencies. And in light of this, I think this is a very important session, and I'm sure that this eminent panel would cover up all the issues related to the terror financing. With this brief overview, let me invite Professor Dalbir to share his thoughts and views. Over to you, Professor Dalbir.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. And also thank you for the liberal introduction. It's much appreciated. My topic for today is terror financing in Australia. Thanks to Australia's geostrategic location, so far it is quite immune from terrorist attacks on its soil, but not immune from terrorism financing that can facilitate terrorist activities elsewhere. Specifically, since the advent of 9/11, state sponsorship of terrorism has declined. This has led to terrorists to generate their own revenues. And in the process, this has also enticed some of the diaspora to involve either directly or indirectly in the internal affairs of their home countries. The involvement of diaspora can be as simple as transferring remittances back home legally to as complex as transferring funds illegally through cyber domains to procure advanced weapon system and provide transnational logistics to the militants. Australia, being a country of migrants constituted by over 200 different nationalities, has the tendency to turn into a hotbed for financial support to terroristic organizations. But the research indicates a migrant carries baggage of culture and religion, religious beliefs, and retains strong emotional bonds with the home countries. As per the Australian Security Intelligence Organization investigations, 30 Australians traveled to Afghanistan or Pakistan between 1990 and 2010 to participate in jihad. However, in the case of Syria and Iraq, 130 Australians fought along with the jihadist groups. Fortunately, in comparison to other developed countries, the Australian-based financing of terrorism is minimal. Australian registered charities send around $1.5 billion overseas each year in donations and grants. Siphoning off even a small proportion of that money to terrorist groups could boost their capabilities and cause serious harm to the communities. Therefore, there remains an ongoing need to continue counter-terrorism efforts, which include the gathering of financial intelligence. In Australia, a complex regulatory framework is in place that is designed to track financial transactions that could be indicative of money laundering or financing of terrorism. Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, that is Australia's financial intelligence unit, receives information from approximately 20,000 regulated businesses of specified types of transactions. Australia has developed a comprehensive and layered approach based on the nature of threat, vulnerability, strategic, and operational factors. The 2006 Counter-Terrorism White Paper, Securing Australia, Protecting Our Community, emphasized on 4 key elements to deter and contain both domestic and international terrorism that include analysis, protection, response, and resilience. Although the initial impetus of measures to counter the financing of terrorism was limited to terroristic attacks, but the guidance provided by the Financial Action Task Force and the recently adopted United Nations Security Council Resolution 2462 widened the scope of terrorism financing. This includes the groups that finance personnel, accommodation, material, communications, and travel, among others. Funding terrorism need not therefore be related to an attack, terroristic attack, but to the maintenance of the terrorist organizations more broadly. Now, after this brief introduction, let's look at the channels of terrorism financing. There are different channels. Number one, self-funding. Individuals use legitimate sources to pay their travel and living expenses to fight alongside terrorist groups overseas. Family and associates in Australia have also knowingly or unwittingly transferred their own legitimately obtained funds to persons engaged in conflict. In Australia, the banking and remittance sectors are used more frequently than other channels to send funds to individuals engaged in foreign conflicts, some of whom are also suspected of engaging with terrorist groups. This largely reflects the central role of the banking sector in Australia and the utility of the remittance sector to move smaller amounts of money to jurisdictions where formal financing channels are less accessible. The number two channel is online payment systems. This may be used to collect donations and transfer funds to extremists in Australia and overseas. The use of online payment systems may correspond with the use of social media by terrorist groups and extremists to radicalize, recruit, and communicate with sympathizers. Furthermore, electronic, online, and new payment methods pose an emerging terrorism financing risk, which is likely to increase in future as overall use of these systems grow. Many of these systems can be accessed globally and are used to transfer funds quickly. A number of online payment systems and digital currencies are also anonymous by design, making them attractive for terrorist financing, particularly when the payment system is based in a jurisdiction with a comparatively weaker anti-money laundering or counter-terrorism financing regime. Third, charities and non-profit organizations. These may be used to raise funds for groups engaged in foreign conflict and as a cover to transfer funds offshore. The risks associated with the misuse of charities and non-profit organizations are high, as these organizations offer the capacity for groups to raise relatively large amounts of money over time. Charities and non-profit organizations which operate in crisis and war zones overseas are at risk of being infiltrated and exploited by terrorist groups in these areas. Funds sent to Afghanistan and neighboring countries for humanitarian aid are at increased risk of being used for financing terrorism if they are sent through less established or startup charities and non-profit organizations. In the context of Australia, there are relatively low incidences of terrorism financing. So far, charities and non-profit organizations have not featured in a large number of Australian terrorism financing cases. Yet another channel is Hawala, that is very popular in South Asia, where the migrants send the money back. So Hawala is an alternative remittance system which operates outside the organized financial sector and greatly facilitates the avoidance of detection when transferring terrorism funds. And another channel can be cross-border movement of cash and bearer negotiable instruments. These can be used to courier funds to terrorist groups overseas. Extremists traveling overseas to train or fight may also carry cash or bearer negotiable instruments to cover their own personal expenses. In addition, prepaid travel money cards have also been used to transfer funds offshore for terrorism financing. Generally, these go unnoticed. Now the question arises after discussion of the channels, how to identify terrorism financing. Though there can be several identifiers, but I will discuss only the major ones. Number one, when multiple customers transfer funds to the same beneficiary located in a high-risk jurisdiction. Number two, when a customer transfers funds to multiple beneficiaries located in a high-risk jurisdiction. Number three, when using a similar business name as an entity listed in Australia and overseas. Number four, when there is sudden increase in account activity that is inconsistent with the customer's existing profile. Number five, when there are multiple cash deposits into personal account described as donations or contributions to humanitarian aid. Number six, when multiple customers use the same address and telephone number to conduct account activity. And the last one I can say is the proscribed entities or entities suspected of terrorism using third-party accounts such as the account of a child or a family member to conduct transfers, deposits, or withdrawals. So after discussing these identifiers, let's look into the legislative framework in Australia. Australia gives due consideration to the counter-finance terrorism obligations set out by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373. This resolution requires nation states to prevent and suppress the financing of terrorist acts and take the necessary steps to prevent the commission of terrorist acts. In addition, Australia's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regime is based on international standards developed by the Financial Action Task Force. These standards form the basis for a coordinated international response to combat money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In consonance with the United Nations resolutions, Australia enacted its first anti-terrorism laws in 2002. It amended the Criminal Code Act 1995 and incorporated funding of terrorism and terrorist organizations in Division 103.1 and 103.2. The Criminal Code applies if a person provides or collects funds and the person is reckless as to whether the funds will be used to facilitate or engage in terrorist act. A person commits an offense even if the terrorist act does not occur. The penalty for the offense is life imprisonment. So far, people charged for terrorist financing offenses remain in double digit in Australia. In addition to this, Australia also imposes autonomous sanctions under its Autonomous Sanctions Act 2011 and corresponding regulations. Penalties for individuals who breach Australian sanction laws include imprisonment for up to 10 years or a fine of $400,000 to $500,000 or 3 times the value of the transaction, whichever is greater. Bodies corporate can be fined with $1.7 million or 3 times the value of the transaction, whichever is greater. The entities providing a designated service under the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act are required to report the activities and transactions to Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre. This acts as the intelligence wing, financial intelligence wing in Australia. Some of the activities include to conduct customer identification, verification, ongoing due diligence, and transaction monitoring. Also, they are required to report suspicious matters, threshold sanction transactions of $10,000 or more, and international funds transfer instructions. They are required to conduct money laundering and terrorism financing risk assessment, as well as make and retain certain records for over 7 years. In addition to its own legislative instruments, Australia actively participates in regional counter-terrorism financing summits. During the 5th Manila Communique, the regional countries agreed to proactively identify and share counter-terrorism financing strategies through regional operational collaboration based on the outcomes and recommendations of the Southeast Asia Counter-Terrorism Financing Working Group Discussion Toolkit. So in sum, I can say that to establish an effective control regime, Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, Australian businesses, domestic partner agencies, governments, and international counterparts work in close collaboration. Furthermore, Australia encourages to send funds to the to the to the areas that are vulnerable or war-torn areas through the through the humanitarian through the United Nations Humanitarian Agency or through the Australian Humanitarian Organization, so that they not hand over to the other persons or used for illegal activities. I will stop here within my time limit. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you, Professor Dalbir. Let's collect the questions at the end of this panel.
Okay,
Once
that's
we
good.
get all the speakers.
Yeah.
And really, no, thank you so much. It was very well structured, and you have emphasized all the aspects of the terror financing and what are the steps the Australian government has taken. And it is also sort of some of the lessons that we can also replicate in some other parts as well.
Yeah.
Particularly the one you mentioned about this legislative framework and the context, the immigrations. That is a big, important, serious challenge. The illegal, being it an illegal immigration or even the legal migration, which happens. And in South Asia, it's a most challenging issues for as a counter-terrorism thing. We have say, due to porous borders and lack of infrastructure or institutional response to regulate this migrations or illegal migrations. Thank you so much, and we'll get back to you for questions. And I request the participants to post their questions in the chat box and keep your questions so that once you have a Q&A sessions, and we'll collect all the questions. With that, now we move to Professor Dr. Tal Pavel. Professor Tal Pavel, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes,
Yeah.
I'm here. Good afternoon. Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon. Good afternoon. Good to have you here, and welcome to Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. Before I request him to speak, and let me introduce about Dr. Tal Pavel. He's currently head of the cyber security studies in the Information Systems School at the Academic College of Tel Aviv, Yafo, and the founder and director of the privately owned Institute for Cyber Policy Studies. Dr. Pavel is an academic lecturer, researcher, and speaker specializing in cyber threat and cyber policy. He has also served as a keynote speaker at international conferences and has been interviewed as an expert on cyber security related issues for major media outlets. He holds a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from Bar Ilan University, Israel, and he's wrote a dissertation titled Changes in Governmental Restrictions over the Use of Internet in Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates between year 2002 and 2005. With this introduction, once again, I welcome you, Dr. Pavel, for joining us today, and I request you to share your thoughts on the theme terror financing. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this a very interesting, profound, and important event. With your permission, I'll share my presentation. I hope you see my presentation.
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Do you
Yep. Yeah, it's clear.
Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. Thank you, sir. So my intention in this short presentation is to, that's the theme of this panel, to discuss a bit about terrorism and online fundraising, digital financing. And in this case, I took some Middle Eastern terrorist organizations and how do they raise funds using the internet. So that's the aim of my presentation. We know that there is cyber attack and physical attack. There is a life cycle And we can see here that the life cycle of such attack include several phases. Here we can see 6, but there are a lot of more stages. But when we have the planning and preparation, we have several stages as part of this planning and preparation, including raising of funds. And when it comes to financing, as can seen, there are those 3 stages in which those organizations raise funds by donation, self-funding, even criminal activities, and we'll see such. That's the first stage. The second is, well, how do you transfer the funds to the target, to the end user, and at the end, the usage of the funds. As can seen, to purchase weapons, making bomb-making equipment, payment for recruitment and training, and finance living expenses of terrorists. When we try to understand who are the most prominent terrorist organizations, well, no doubt that, as we know and as can seen here by those figures, Islamic State is the deadliest terrorist organizations that we have so far. After that, the Taliban, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and so on and so forth. Now, let's see what are the financial opportunities that the Islamic State had. So there was a claim that the Paris attackers of Islamic State, I think it was Bataclan, had a wallet of $3 million in Bitcoin. Whether it's true or false, perhaps we'll never know, but this is a claim. And as can see from different news headlines, use-based ISIS self-fundraising on dark web, new evidence suggests the Islamic State, or someone pretending to be, is trying to raise funds using Bitcoin and so on and so forth. And please look at the dates. We now know the dark web and Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, but those headlines are from 2014, 2015. And it's another example of how the Islamic State, in this case, knew how to use the latest technology and the latest advantages of modern means for their usage. In this case, 7-8 years ago, the usage of cryptocurrencies. But Bitcoin was not the only way of Islamic State to mobilize and to finance themselves. Some of those methods were horrific, as can seen here. Islamic State are trading thousands of women using social media apps, and it is allegedly horrific messages of, it's written in Arabic, but it's written here that she's a female beauty, beautiful, 12 years old. She's a virgin, and the seller wants for her $12,500 US. And the sell is soon as well here. Well, is the Islamic State using Bitcoin? Well, probably yes, but as seen, that's the last thing we should worry about. Why? Because as can seen, they knew how to diverse the possibilities of fundraising, oil, theft, even taxation, and you can see here that most of the income of Islamic State was, in this case, from oil. There are different figures, and it's amazing because here you can see ISIS estimate revenues 2014, 2016, and it's divided into taxes and fees, oil and gas, kidnapping and extortion, and here's the same. But it's amazing to see the differences in numbers, although it's supposed to be the same categories and the same years, the same period of time, but the numbers are different. Just for example, you can see at 2015 that there is supposed to be this section of kidnapping, but when you come to this graph, there is no evidence of kidnapping. So even though they are supposed to be same categories and the same period of time, it looks like the numbers are different, which bring us to some thoughts of, don't believe everything you read in the internet, as Abraham Lincoln said. And we know this meme well. Beside Islamic State, we have some others, in this case, Islamic terrorist organizations that knew how to use the online sphere and how to raise funds. In this case, this is a post published by Hamas, as Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas, and it's written here in Arabic that they start to receive the support, the financial support of the resistance with the currency Bitcoin, and this is the address of the wallet of Qassam Sabah Brigade, the military wing of Hamas, and as you can see in here, there is 2 minutes video clip that Hamas published with instructions. I will not show it all. اتبع الخطوات التالية. زيارة رابط التبرع وتفريع عن موقع القسام لك عنوان الذي بإمكانك تحويل تبرعك إليه بنسخ العنوان أو الكود بهاتفك المحمول من صفحة الموقع. موقع القسام يمنح كل زائر عنوان محفظة خاص للتبرع عليه. احرص على عدم مشاركته مع الآخرين. لتحويل المبلغ الذي ترغب التبرع به بإحدى الطرق الآتية. طريقة: اطلب من أي مكتب صرافة إيداع المبلغ في عنوان المحفظة الذي حصلت عليه من موقع القسام دون إخباره بالجهة التي يتبع لها العنوان. الطريقة الثانية: إذا كنت تمتلك محفظة آمنة فقم بتحويل المبلغ منها مباشرة إلى محفظة القسام. كيف أنشئ محفظة آمنة؟ نستخدم في هذه الخطوات هاتفا عاما حتى لا يتم ربط المحفظة المنشئة بعنوان الاي بي الخاص بك. قم بإنشاء المحفظة الخاصة بك من خلال أحد المواقع المعتمدة. الطريقة الثانية: قم بإنشاء حساب جديد على إحدى منصات التداول. أودع مبلغ التبرع في حسابك على المنصة باستخدام بطاقتك الائتمانية. قم بالتحويل من حسابك بالمنصة إلى محفظتك الآمنة، ثم من محفظتك الآمنة إلى محفظة القسام. إذا رغبت في إعادة التبرع فبإمكانك التحويل إلى نفس العنوان الذي قمت بالتحويل إليه في المرة الأولى، أو بإمكانك الحصول على عنوان جديد من موقع القسام زيادة في الأمان في اليوم التالي من دخولك لصفحة التبرع. في حال حجب موقع القسام في بلدك، استخدم أي من آليات تغيير الأي بي. أخي المجاهد، أختي المجاهدة، احجز لك سهما في النصر الذي بات قريبا، ولا تحقرن إسهامك مهما صبر. تقبل الله منا ومنكم. So it's amazing to see this 2 minutes short video clip that very visualizing explain not only what is Bitcoin, and how to purchase Bitcoin, but how to use it and how to donate. And let us remember that this very short visual, short video clip is made by a military wing of a terrorist organization, okay, Hamas. It's not a corporate or a philanthropic organization. So this is a very good example of the usage. But Hamas is not the only one. As can seen here, almost two years ago, funding terrorism, a campaign of a jihadi organization operating in the Gaza Strip to raise funds in Bitcoin, as can seen here. And another one, as you can see, the address of the Bitcoin wallet. And in this case, the organization is Jaish al-Ummah al-Salafi, the army of the Ummah, the nation, the Salafi nation, the army of the Salafi nation. And we can see instructions on Twitters how to use Bitcoins and how to raise funds and how to provide your Bitcoins to the cause with such instructions, and even how to find Bitcoin ATM. Another interesting one is something like a fatwa, perhaps even, some kind of instructions, a religious decree that enable the believer to give his sadaqah, his religious fund, in this case, for the benefit of Islamic State. Bitcoin and the charity of violent physical struggle. Bitcoin was sadaqat al-jihad. So this is another aspect, which means the religious justification for raising funds to, perhaps this case, Islamic State, using Bitcoin. Another aspect is the connection between terrorist organization and criminal organization. We know that in Africa we have, especially in Nigeria, what it's called the Nigerian sting, that it's lasts for something like at least 3 decades. And here it's very interesting article that claimed that supposed to be a connection between this Nigerian sting and funding Boko Haram. A previous one, which was something like 2 decades ago, almost 2 decades ago, more than 2 decades, was the usage of allegedly foundations for the benefits of the widows and the orphan in Palestine and Lebanon, but as a matter of fact, were used in order to raise funds for Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. This is the case of Holy Land Foundation that was revealed in Texas, US, and as can see in here, United States versus El Mizayin, Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development, and it was a case of almost 2 decades ago. Another aspect is such campaigns not only using Bitcoin, but to have campaigns on social media, social networks, in which everyone can raise his funds in order that the fighters, the jihadists, may buy, in this case, RPG, and this is a sniper rifle, and AK-47, and this so on and so forth. At the end, just 2 examples of how to cope with such activities of terrorist organization to fund themselves using online activities as described here. In Israel, under the Ministry of Justice, there is the Israeli Money Laundering and Terror Financing Prohibition Authority. It's a dedicated authority, as the name describes it, money laundering and terror financing prohibition, that aim to tackle, mitigate, and confront such activities. And you can see here money laundering risk heat map created by Israeli Ministry of Justice and the different type of money laundering activities. And of course, another example, previous one, is the United Nations. We know 2 decades ago, there is the international conventions for the suppression of the financing of terrorism. So if I need to summarize this short presentation, I'll say that terrorist organizations know quite well how to use the latest technology. We saw that on Islamic State, we saw that on Hamas, but there are just few examples. They know how to use the latest technology to promote the call to create terrorism, to spread the ideology, and to, of course, to enable the physical terrorist activities. And in such, one of those stages is to use the online platform in order to raise funds and to finance the terrorist activities. Thank you very much for listening and your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tal. I think very informative and also insightful. You have got, give us an understanding that how technology and those disruptive technologies like bitcoins and cryptocurrencies pose a serious challenge to monitor and identify and trace these transactions to fund the terrorism and terrorist activities. It's a very interesting and insightful event, and it's added a flavor to the today's discussion and theme. Thank you so much, and we will come back to you again with the during the question and answer sessions. I hope participants have some questions and comments on your topic. It's very interesting and informative. Now I request Sri Abhinav Pandey. Abhinav, are you there?
I'm here.
Abhinav needs no introduction. Anyways, I once again and welcome to this session. Speakers are here to speak on this financing terror, and he is going to give us the Indian perspective and also the case of J&K. He has a unique experience of both academic as well as the practical, the ground experience. So with a brief introduction, that he is a geopolitical analyst specializing on counterterrorism, right-wing extremism. He is also the founder and CEO of a geopolitics and security think tank based in Udaipur, which is Usana's foundation, and in which that we are having this annual Maharana Pratap Security Dialogue. Thank you, Abhinav, and I request you to, and he has published books on very interesting books on radicalization in India and exploration. It's a very unique book on this thing, and he has also served as an advisor to the former governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Satyapal Malik, and addressed him on security and counterterrorism, the Islamist organizations and intelligence affairs, and how to and policy and counterterrorism policies. With this brief introduction, I request Sri Abhinav Pandya to share his thoughts and views. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jagan, for the generous introduction. And I also thank Professor Dalbir and Dr. Tal for giving such insightful views on this critical subject of terror financing.
Professor Tal, you can stop sharing your presentation.
Yeah. Sorry, just a second, I'll try.
It's okay.
I'm going to talk more about the Jammu and Kashmir experience, but before that, I'll just have some very fundamental questions like assessing the global war against terror financing. Over the last 15 years, especially after the September 11, the world community, especially the major Western powers, had a consensus to launch a crackdown on terror financing. But after 15, 20 years of war against terror financing, are we successful or have we failed? It's a big question. Well, we have much bigger terror groups like ISIS, which had the largest funding and much and a highly diversified portfolio of terror funding, which included organ trade, which included raising money from oil sales, artifact sales, and raising money from diverse other sources. In fact, officially levying taxes from the people in that area. Now we have Taliban back into power, and Taliban will definitely control, it's going to control the large tracts of the narcotics belt in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and certainly a huge monetary strength is going to come out of that region. Okay. So it's a big question. Well, the world community, the counterterrorism community, focused more on just cracking down on the formal channels of terror, of moving money, and just like banking system, we came out with the SWIFT code and all those things. But then terror groups shifted to areas, shifted to the channels, and shifted to methods which were totally out of the ambit of the formal scrutiny of the agencies. And especially when it comes to the Islamist groups, the financing is a very, very subtle and very, very refined component of this whole idea of jihad. It works in many different ways, which cannot be generally registered on the radar of the intelligence agencies, or even, I would say, the investigating agency. For example, one simple thing of zakat collection, like you have a simple ceremony, simple festival. Okay, there you collect money, and it's sometimes it's collected for genuine reasons, for very good reasons, but you never know. A part of that finally ends up with the terror groups. Now, coming back to Kashmir, I find that it's a unique case of terror funding, because like in the other cases in Palestine or in the case of ISIS, all these transnational terror groups had a very different mandate and a very different organizational structure and a clear idea of jihad. But Kashmir as such was inhabited by people who by temperament were not into extremism or radicalization. Kashmiri culture, I mean, it was more a result of syncretic intermingling between Hinduism, Buddhism, Shaivism. So the population of Kashmir was very averse to radical tendencies in the beginning, and Pakistan knew it very well. That because in the year 1947, when the nation was partitioned, India, Pakistan was moving on the idea of two-nation theory, and they claimed that to create Pakistan, that it's a Muslim dominated area. And they said that, well, Kashmir also happens to be a Muslim dominated state, so Kashmir has to join Pakistan. But surprisingly, the popular elected leader of Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah Sahab, and the king of Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, both of them chose to join India, the secular India, over Pakistan, because they said that, but the system which we have, our cultural legacy, our religious legacy, doesn't align well with Pakistan's extremist hardwiring. And after that, Pakistan knew it very well, that until and unless you inject that seed of radical Islamic extremism, that fundamentalism in Kashmir's innards, you will not be able to sustain a separatist and a terrorist movement. And this is the reason why Pakistan failed in 1965 war, in 1971 war, because the local people never sided with Pakistan. But 1980s onwards, they started cultivating Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a radical Islamist group, and that Jamaat-e-Islami believes in the idea of Maulana Maududi, which is the idea of political Islam, which was completely alien to the Sufi and syncretic Islam of Kashmir. And the purpose behind investing in Jamaat-e-Islami was to radicalize a common man of Kashmir, so that he becomes naturally inclined towards Pakistan narrative in Kashmir. All that happened, and so I'll just come to the details later, but just covering the philosophical part before, the very fundamental part. So they created a very fine network of Islamism, terrorism, and separatism in Kashmir. And all these three nodes, all these three different domains, they were sustaining each other. They were complementing each other. Like how? I'll just explain. in sustaining Islamism, they were raising different extremist groups, which were mostly, overtly not indulging in terrorist activity. Overtly, they were religious groups like Jamaat-e-Islam, or for instance, Ahle Hadith Kashmir, which is the Wahhabi or Salafi version of Kashmir. Overtly speaking, in an overt manner, they were mostly engaging in charity activities, religious activities. Jamaat was also engaging in welfare activities, educational activities. They were opening schools. But in their curriculum, they were preaching an idea, they were preaching, the doctrines which were totally at odds with a democratic and a multicultural society, which were at odds with the liberal world order, with the liberal, with even the idea of nation state. So that's how they generated some kind of resentment and hatred towards India, hatred towards democracy, hatred towards the liberal secular national world order. Okay? And the second part comes to the separatism. Now, along with this, they injected the idea that, well, in Kashmir, because you are being persecuted because of your particular religious identity. This whole oppression, this fake fabricated narrative of oppression was grounded in the idea that India, being a Hindu country, is oppressing the common people because of their religious identity. From there comes this groundswell of separatism. And then from that, when you create the overall environment, overall infrastructure of resentment, overall infrastructure of extremism, from that they could recruit a good number of people into the terrorist activity. So it was a very finely balanced. On one hand, you have terror groups, mainly Lashkar, Jaish, and Hizbul Mujahideen operating, and Pakistan prefers to maintain about 250 to 300 militants every year and provides for their logistics, for their weapons, for their other things like maintaining OGWs, overground workers. Overground workers are the people who hide in a plain sight, and they cater to the logistical needs of the terror groups, like transporting weapons, facilitating shelter, providing food, and sometimes indulging in terrorist acts also. And OGWs, in course of time, they ultimately they join the terrorist groups and become active cadres finally. So basically, the journey of a terrorist starts from the status of an OGW. So Pakistan, on one hand, maintains this 250 to 300 militants. On the other hand, it maintains a very finely oiled system of extremist organizations like Jamaat-e-Islam, which have a very widespread and a very massive influence over the society. For instance, Jamaat-e-Islami is regarded as a very prestigious religious organization, and they run schools, they run orphanages, they indulge in all kinds of charitable activities. They have a very powerful influence over the politics. One particular political party, People's Democratic Party, which is mostly rooted in South Kashmir, it has its entire vote bank coming from Jamaat sympathizers. Now, People's Democratic Party is a mainstream political party of India, of Kashmir, and they believe in the idea of India. They abide by the Indian constitution overtly, but then they are very vulnerable to, and in fact, they are dependent or sometimes hands in glove with what Jamaat-e-Islami does. And Jamaat-e-Islami has a very separatist narrative. Jamaat-e-Islami nurtures militancy. In Kashmir, it is said that all the targeted killings and assassinations, they have to be sanctioned by Jamaat-e-Islami. I'm quoting Bashir Asad. He's a veteran Kashmiri journalist. He has written a book called K-File, and the K-File, yes. No, so in that he cites evidence, he gives evidence to prove that the PDP leaders, some very senior ministers, and some of the very senior position holders in PDP, they were openly indulging in talks with terrorist cadres. Some of the terrorist cadres were sheltering in their homes. Even the ministers were escorting terrorist commanders in their official vehicles. That's the kind of nexus. Then Jamaat-e-Islami run its schools. So when they run their schools, initially in 1990s, the terrorist groups, they destroyed, they buried all the government schools, which were imparting secular curriculum. The only way to replace was them through Jamaat-e-Islami schools. And in Jamaat-e-Islami schools, they were teaching Maulana Maududi ideology. So the people who came out of the Jamaat schools, certainly they had much better infrastructure because they were all Pakistan-funded schools. Jamaat was collecting a lot of money in the name of jihad. And when those students came out, they joined the state administration, mostly the police services. They joined the academia, the education services, lecturers, they joined the administration, they joined the financial institutions of the state. And many of them joined the services at the recommendations of Jamaat-e-Islami leaders and Jamaat-e-Islami heavyweights. So those who joined on the recommendations of Jamaat-e-Islami heavyweights, in most cases, they paid heavy bribes to Jamaat-e-Islami leaders. A large part of those bribes went to the terror groups for terror funding. Finally, when they joined the services and when they were in the administration or maybe in the intelligence or maybe in academia, they were actually covertly supporting, aiding and facilitating the Jamaat-e-Islami. They were donating a part of their salary as some kind of a gratitude to an organization which facilitated their entry in a government employment, especially in a state where employment is a major issue and people actually literally die for getting a government job. There was a reason the Jamaat-e-Islami's penetration in the state intelligence apparatus, in the state administrative apparatus became so immense, became so deep that it was said in Kashmir that one order comes from Delhi and in the morning the order comes and by 5 in the evening, the order's copy was in the market or it was at Haidarpura, Syed Ali Shah Gilani's residence. Syed Ali Shah Gilani was the main separatist leader of Hurriyat Conference, the most towering separatist man of Hurriyat Conference, deeply in links with Hizbul Mujahideen, allegedly sanctioned many targeted assassinations in Kashmir. So that was the state. In academia, especially if you see in Kashmir University, if you go, most of the appointments are at the recommendations of Jamaat-e-Islami. And the minority communities are discriminated, not simply minority communities, even the local Muslims following the Barelvi or Sufi thought, not agreeing to abide by Jamaat-e-Islami's dictates, are sidelined, they are marginalized in promotions, recruitments and appointments. There was one famous guy, his name was Rafiq Bhatt. He was a professor in Kashmir University, a professor of sociology. And I was talking to a fellow who investigated his case. So he told me that Professor Bhatt was actually teaching Maulana Maududi's ideology in his sociology classes. And one fine day, he declared that he was quitting university and he joined militancy. He joined Hizbul Mujahideen. He was killed in an encounter just 2 days after that in Shopian. So that's the state of penetration. If you go to master's classes in Kashmir University at senior level, people with very radical approaches and radical ideologies, they would question, they would have problems with using the word secular. In Kashmir University, not long back, you could find people, even the girls wearing shorts and girls wearing normal Western dresses. Now it's full of burqa clad and very heavily Islamized, copying the Western, the Arabic model of Islamism. One can find that. Now, this was the case of Jamaat-e-Islami. Besides that, Kashmir presents some unique models of raising fund. Okay? It was it's very interesting. Okay? Raising funds through selling medical seats, okay? For example. So Pakistan promises medical seats or free medical seats to the sons and daughters of deceased the militants who are killed in encounters by security forces. Normally, all these medical seats are sanctioned by the Hurriyat leaders or senior separatist leaders like Syed Ali Shah Gilani, Shabir Shah, and all these different leaders are given quotas for allocating medical seats. Like some senior leader will have 10 seats in his quota, and if he recommends, then he can recommend 10 seats. So those people will go to Pakistan and they will get those admissions in higher education institutes, like mostly medical institutes and engineering institutes. And the money which they were supposed to give to these people, normally here in Kashmir, some of these seats are sold. The seats given to the sons and daughters of the dead terrorist, normally that's at a very discounted rate. But some of the seats are sold, and the money raised is huge. Like for one seat, maybe 12 lakhs to 18 lakhs, 21 lakhs, and a large part of this money goes into terror funding. Some part of it is definitely used for creating personal assets by separatist leaders, but a large part goes into terror funding. And then when these students go to Pakistan to study medicine or engineering or other higher education courses, maybe human rights, okay, they are used by ISI as conduits for transferring money, for transferring information. when they visit Kashmir to their parents in vacations, they are given information. I mean, they are tasked with transferring information and even transferring money. So all kinds of activities, and they are indoctrinated for all anti-India and anti-national activities. This is how Pakistan is creating a strong constituency. And this medical seats is a big business. Now it's not just confined to the medical seats business. It has gone beyond that. So you can find, ISI Pakistan sponsoring the education of young Kashmiri students in Bangladesh, in Central Asian countries, even in Europe. Even in Germany, you can find them. In Turkey has emerged as a new Kashmiri students studying there and engaging, and Pakistan indoctrinating them in all kinds of anti-India activities. This is one way. Then selling animal hides. So this is Dr. Christine Fair has highlighted this like very lengthy details in her famous book on Lashkar-e-Taiba. Selling, there is huge amounts of money, especially Lashkar, by selling animal hides, and the collections are huge. They're made in Pakistan, and they also there is huge amounts of money. Another interesting and a very unique way of raising money for terror funding in Kashmir was through LOC trade, which was recently banned by the government. So LOC trade was a very unique mechanism. When the PDP government came to power in year 2002-3, and after that they were saying that, well, the road to Muzaffarabad should be open, and people on the both sides of the border should be able to freely interact with each other and engage in trade, and that will create some good environment, that will create bonhomie, and it will enhance the feel good factor, also diffuse the tensions. The Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government and the later Manmohan Singh government, they were very positive with the idea. Finally, they approved this LOC terror funding by 2006 or 7. Immediately after that, by 2006 or 7, that funding was, LOC trade was sanctioned. I mean, this was approved. And 2008, Kashmir has a major unrest. 2009, Kashmir has a massive civil unrest. Now, the new phenomena of stone pelting comes. In stone pelting, Masarrat Alam, who is a famous separatist Kashmiri leader, he was distributing video CDs of the stone pelting in Palestinian territories, and they were trying to radicalize the common young students. 2011, again there was unrest. 2014 there was unrest, and finally it all culminated in 2016. When there was the largest unrest in Kashmir after the encounter death of militant commander Burhan Wani. Now, for all this, money was coming through LOC trade, and it was done in a very interesting manner. Basically, the person who got the license for the LOC trade, he had no idea. Someone else was trading under that license. I mean, the person was having the license, but someone else, they were moving goods from this part to the other part of India. And they were sending those goods which were not even sanctioned under the LOC trade regime. LOC trade regime approved sending local indigenous goods, but they were sending goods which are found in the southernmost part of India or even from Chhattisgarh. And through LOC trade, they were smuggling weapons, narcotics, drugs. Huge amounts of weapons were caught. And finally, in the 2016 unrest, it said that 400 crores of, even I'm really bad with figures and names, sorry, okay, but that kind of money came, and it created a massive problem in Kashmir. This new phenomenon of stone pelting, it was all financed, because young students, the young generation of Kashmir, which were mostly unemployed people, they were badly in the need of money. So now, to capitalize on their frustration, their resentment, they were given money. There used to be coordinators of stone pelting. So whenever there was an encounter, the Maulvi from the local mosque would start sloganeering, start shouting, and they would mobilize people for stone pelting. The coordinator was given a much larger amount, let's say around 15,000, 20,000, and each stone pelter was given 500 to 800 rupees. So they would come and they would start disturbing the proper security forces operation to neutralize the militant. Now, in that stone pelting, if a person dies, that would create another excuse to create a big human rights crisis in Kashmir. That happened. So it was just simply kind of a thing which was spiraling out of control to create an issue out of the issue. Then Pakistan funded media, because funding local media to create an overall narrative of separatism, overall narrative of human rights abuses, overall narrative of oppression, victimization. It was very essential. The terrorist groups, normally their main strength lies in the publicity which they get. Whatever they do, if they don't get enough publicity for their little acts of terrorism, it makes no sense. So main media and big media groups, I must say, some of the very prominent newspapers, some of them have been questioned by the NIA recently, and that includes big names like Greater Kashmir. Many of these big media groups were funded by Pakistan, and they were peddling false and fake narratives. So it was a very one-sided. If you know, in my upcoming book on terror funding in Kashmir, I've analyzed the news coverage by those media groups, and one can easily see that the way they were reporting things, it was completely biased, and it was just, I mean, they were acting on the directions of GHQ Rawalpindi. Then the charities. Many of the charities were indulging in all kinds of illicit, illegal hawala transactions, and they were supporting especially the terror groups and the separatist groups. Right? So it created a very fine nexus where a charity, completely anonymous charity, and overtly in a development work will be in cahoots with a terror group or with the separatist groups, and the middlemen, they were taking money, carrying money, but it was very difficult to identify. Yes. Then the international charities working in USA and working in the Western Europe. Many of these charities were they were doing all kinds of legitimate work. I mean, reportedly, they were engaging in development work, flood relief in US, and they were getting so much credibility in the Western world, like Kashmir American Council, Kashmir Canadian Council. They were getting funded by the US government for all kinds of relief work. That was the reason, and because of the money which they generated, they could create lobbies in Washington, D.C., and it became very difficult to act against them. But many of these charities, like Kashmir American Council, Kashmir Canadian Council, had deep-rooted ties with Lashkar Hizbul Mujahideen. They were funneling money to Khidmat Foundation in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Muhammad Fai, Mr. Fai, he is a famous ISI lobbyist. He was working in Washington, D.C., and he was facilitating the work of many of these groups. Later, Americans, the federal agencies, they found him and he was arrested. He was fined. So there was a network which they had created in the Western world also. And the last point which I want to highlight was the state funding terrorist activities in Kashmir. If I raise this question, it sounds very contradictory. It sounds counterintuitive. But then, if you look at the details, certainly one feels that things were not all right. Because just one example, like in the state government, as I mentioned, there was a huge penetration by terrorist and separatist elements in the state government. Okay? Now, if a development contract had to be given by the state government, then because someone who is in charge of giving the development contract came from the Jamaat-e-Islami background, he would give that development contract to a surrendered militant. And that surrendered militant would be siphonning funds and funneling funds to the terrorist groups. That happened. They were never utilized for the development work. All these big newspapers, which I mentioned, they were getting massive state funding for advertisements for years, for decades. And the narrative, the propaganda which they were doing, that was purely against India, that was purely for Pakistan, purely for Islamic extremism and for the terrorist groups. Another example, some of the assets which our agencies created in Kashmir, they turned out to be double assets. The phenomenon of double agents is not uncommon in the world of intelligence. It's quite common, and it's required. But then one has to look at the fact that when you're cultivating an agent and he's working for multiple agencies, what is he doing for you? Very famously, Vikram Sood, former chief of RNDW, India's external intelligence agency, said that whenever we recruit an asset in Kashmir, ISI tells them that please go and report to IB or RAW and tell them that I want to work for you and just keep doing our work. So in this manner, a lot of double agents, a large number of them, they were created in Kashmir, and they were getting handsome amount of money from the Indian agencies, and they were providing completely rubbish information, which served no purpose. And those information, the narrative were very nicely curated and shaped by Pakistan. And such assets, I mean, it's not simply confined to normal lay ordinary people. That includes some very, very senior officials. A very senior officer from the Indian Administrative Service who left and joined politics, went to study abroad in some major Western country, US. There he was allegedly, he was hands in glove, he was in touch with ISI's Kashmir desk. And evidence has come to light where he was giving all kinds of anti-Indian narrative. He was trying to basically, I mean, he had given a project of raising a major political party on the lines of Muslim United Front, which was active in 1987, and which was Syed Salahuddin was the leader of Muslim United Front. Finally, Muslim United Front lost the election, and Syed Salahuddin went to Pakistan. Currently, he is the head of Hizbul Mujahideen. So that fellow, the officer who I'm talking about, he wanted to raise a political party on those lines. Very well in touch with people, ISI people in Turkey, ISI people in Pakistan. So these are the linkages where we need to worry. I can talk about another young political leader from PDP. Once he was the darling of the state. He had become so powerful during the PDP government that his one order, one telephone call could really make the Director General Police, make the Inspector General Police and senior officers shiver. He could get anyone transferred. When the senior leader, central government minister, Home Minister Rajnath Singh ji visited, he was, I mean, I'm quoting all this from the open sources. There's nothing hidden. I mean, you can, if you just Google, you can find all this information in the open sources. No? He mobilized a large number of people for his visit. And Mr. Rajnath Singh openly praised him. The young politician's name is Mr. Wahid Para, and currently he's being investigated by NIA, National Investigative Agency, for terror funding. So, I mean, we really need to ask this question, that whether, to what extent we created such assets who were double-edged assets and who were actually sabotaging the national cause. And I make a strong comparison of this phenomenon with what Americans were facing in Afghanistan. Americans pumped in millions of dollars in Pakistan, giving them military aid, developmental aid, and Pakistan was funding Taliban. Pakistan was assisting, supporting Taliban. So once again, it comes full circle. Who was actually funding it? So these are the questions, and I feel that more in an area, if you have to sustain terrorism for a longer duration, you have to invest more in creating an ecosystem of terrorism, ecosystem of radicalization, ecosystem of oppression, ecosystem of hatred. For that, you need to invest in media, cyber warfare, in all kinds of narrative discourse building. And once you do that, you naturally get the recruits. You naturally get suicide bombers from that society itself. So once you make those fundamental investments, later it becomes easier to continue and sustain terrorism. So I would say it's inversely proportional. We can actually draw a relationship. Investing in terrorism is inversely proportional to investing majorly in creating an ecosystem of terrorism. I guess with this, I rest my case. Sorry, I think I have exceeded my time.
Thank you, Mr. Abhinav. It's very informative. Hardly we get to hear from an expert who can go so deep and to micro level, and it reflects that you have such a rich experience and hands-on experience, and also the data with you, and you could easily process and give us an insight to the things. Very interesting, and we really had a very good panel who have shared various cases from starting from the Australia's experience. Then you have got to hear from this Middle East and ISIS and how they are exploiting and these digital financial transactions for terror funding. And last we heard about Mr. Abhinav's very interesting that how Indian case is very unique, particularly J&K, and the terror funding still continue to support and sustain the ecosystem, the terror ecosystem. It's very informative and insightful things. And may I request that should we go for the last speaker to play his presentation, or due to paucity of time, can we go for a discussion? Because I can see a lot of questions being posted in the chat. I let the host to.
It's not a big recording, Dr. Jagan.
Okay,
We can
fine.
play
Yeah.
it like it's a
Sir,
10-minute
what we
recording.
can do is that we can go for the Q&A. I mean, anyway, Dr. Dipanjan is not here for the question
Okay.
answer round. We
Yeah.
can, because there are too many questions, we can have
Exactly.
Q&A first, and then
Yeah.
we'll take
Exactly.
that then.
And towards the end,
yeah.
we can play the recording.
Okay. Is it fine, Mr. Abhinav? Is it
Yeah,
okay
it's
with
fine.
you?
Yes, fine.
Yeah. So let me first, collect the direct questions which have been posed to. There is a direct questions to Professor Tal regarding this, the terror, the accumulation of wealth by the ISAL, and what are the challenges and opportunities to degrade its uh, this network. This is by Colonel Preet Chauhan.
Once again, the question, please.
You have talked about explained about this, the various channels in which the Islamic State and the Hamas and the other networks, they accumulate wealth, and how they have built their terror financing network.
Yeah.
So, what are the challenges for the security forces or the intelligence agencies and opportunities to degrade their financial networks, to
Yeah, thank you.
suppress their networks?
Yeah, thank you very much for this important question. Well, there is no doubt huge challenges and even difficulties for a wide range of law enforcement agencies how to confront and tackle those modern methods of fundraising, because you saw that one of the major example is the usage of Bitcoin. And we know that one of the basic features of Bitcoin is the anonymity, secrecy, the fact that it's allegedly, and I once again will say allegedly, is untraceable. So of course we will not define that security agencies are not able to track, monitor, and even arrest. But no doubt that the usage of those modern technology, including the usage of Tor and the dark web, in order to have more secure communication and encryption software like PGP, are giving the terrorist organization, and mainly the Middle East and North Africa, an advantage that make the security agencies work much harder.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Taul. The next question is addressed to Professor Dalbir. The question for you is that how the Australian partnership with like-minded nations, for instance, its engagement with Quad nations, will help in its commitment to fight the terror financing.
That's very valuable question. I appreciate that. Certainly, there have been provisions of cooperation and coordination between the countries. Mainly comes between Australia and India. They have upgraded their bilateral relationship to the comprehensive strategic partnership. And this comprehensive strategic partnership is an all-encompassing. Rather, Australia has come out with a strategy of enhancing trade relations with India by 2030. And that is a major document that was being prepared by the former Australian High Commissioner to India. India has also appointed former Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, who is coordinating with from Indian side, and have drafted a strategy to cooperate and then enhance trade between the two countries. So they say they are on the track, and 2+2 dialogue is taking place where the defense and the foreign ministers meet from both the countries, and they enter into different sort of mutual interests. Then further expanding it to the quadrilateral security dialogue level. That includes India, Australia, Japan, and United States, India has been involved in 2+2 framework with Japan, United States, and Australia. So that is being expanding. And in addition to that, all these 4 countries support the Financial Action Task Force and also the regulations of the United Nations Security Council. So they are in the same boat. And there have been, during the G20 meeting, there was emphasis on single taxation system. That if a person has paid tax in India, no need to pay the tax again in Australia. So that those have been there, but these mechanisms are at very incentive stage. They further needs teething, they need further elaboration and comprehensiveness so that this can be full-fledgedly being implemented. It appears that it will take some time, and by the end of this year, I think Australia and India will enter into a free trade agreement. And if they enter into free trade agreement, all of these will be these issues about terror financing will be dealt comprehensively.
Thank you, Professor Dalbir. I'll come back to you again with the next round. We have another questions. Let me go to Mr. Abhinav. You have got a couple of questions, but I have just summarized. The first and foremost, the question is about what do you think about the foreign funding mechanism that like you mentioned about some of the charities which used to be the backbone for these Jamaatis and their charitable activities, and those fundings come mostly they come from Saudi and Qatar, these United Arab Emirates. So how do you have to deal with it, and how do you see that's and how it makes the security vulnerable situation vulnerable in Jammu and Kashmir? That's the first and foremost question. The second question I'll come for to the next round.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jagan. Very interesting question and a very relevant question, let's say. Especially dealing with these foreign charities, it's a very, very challenging and a very tricky issue. Recently, me and my colleague Akshay, we investigated the case of Qatar Charity. We came across the huge, this tranche of transactions which were emanating from Qatar Charity Group to India, and they were about 1,200 transactions, and they were being sent to various different groups and various groups in Kerala, some in UP. And while we started investigating, we did not find those organizations even in open domain. And we came across organizations with new names, fake entities. So it's very difficult. And suppose if some charity is sending money to some village, say, Rampur in UP, for some mosque building, in some random remote corner of the place. It's very difficult to find out. Who are the people sending it, and what are they using it for? Overtly speaking, they will always say, well, we are engaging in welfare activities. And unfortunately, the intelligence apparatus in India is in a very bad shape, especially when it comes to dealing with these charities. In the States, the CID special branch, which is normally, so there are 2 branches, CID crime branch and the CID special branch. CID special branch normally takes care of these things, the terrorism and Islamist charity groups and terror financing and all. Those places are considered as some kind of a shunting postings, where people who are not getting field postings where they can earn enough money, they are posted as a punishment posting. No one wants to go there. People don't have the temperament. And the intelligence apparatus in the States is mostly manned by people with police mentality. And here you need people with strategic mentality. It's really shocking that I have come across very senior officers, even from senior, the IPS cadre, who don't know the difference between Ahle Hadith and Jamaat-e-Islami and Barelvi and Deobandi. I don't blame them, because, if they're doing a typical policing work, they're not supposed to know that. If they're engaging in a typical law and order work or managing student elections in the university, for intelligence, you need a very highly specialized, skilled people. For instance, when it comes to charities, if it's a Lashkar charity, then definitely it's, one has to know that because of the ideological linkages, like Lashkar believes in Ahle Hadith ideology. So they must be getting their funding from the Middle Eastern world, maybe from Qatar, maybe from Saudi Arabia, because that's the place where people follow that ideology. Now, if it's Deobandi groups, like Jaish-e-Mohammed working in India, then one has to focus on Pakistan, because in Pakistan you have a Madrasa Haqqaniya, from where Taliban emanated, from where all these different Deobandi groups emanated. And they have a very more, I mean, I would say they have a much bigger penetration in South Asia, a very widespread network. So, I mean, I must say that it's very difficult to track this kind of funding, and our intelligence agencies need to reform completely and do a lot of homework, to especially to address this issue.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Abhinav. The next question to Professor Tal. This is from my side, and also some of them remotely mentioned about that. I just refined that. I see you mentioned about in your presentation is about the new technology, the emerging challenges like bitcoins. These are the disruptive technologies in the coming years to come going to pose serious challenges, and it is also difficult for the agencies like intelligence agencies and security agencies to cope up with this, just to understand these networks. So I would like to know that, do you, and you mentioned about this UN resolution, do you think that we need to have a global framework similar to, in order to update this earlier one, so that we can seek the cooperations from the digital platforms, because some of them companies which are operated, some of the platforms are owned by Chinese and Chinese apps. These are the companies like Paytm and others. So do you need to have a sort of a global norm to regulate these platforms?
Indeed, I think that, and thank you for this question, which look on the other side of which mean how to tackle and combat those activities. And I think that definitely we need an organized cooperation, and we have such. But the question is how, at the end of the day, such cooperation between non-governmental organizations as well as law enforcement agencies and governments, how at the end of the day it really works, how it's what is the efficiency of such activities, even if there are accords and agreements, whether they are effective. And we saw that there is this declaration of the United Nations more than 2 decades ago. But from the Israeli point of view, yes, I can say that definitely security agencies, perhaps not in 100% and not in all cases, but they are able, at least in some cases, to track, to monitor, and to dismantle those activities. And definitely, everyone that took upon himself or herself to confront terrorism must unite and to gather forces to be able to confront those activities. And in our case, online fundraising for such terrorist and malicious activities.
Thanks. Thank you, Professor Tal. Thank you for answer. Next question to Professor Dalbir. This is a question about how do you see that how India and Australia can cooperate in technological sector to curb terror financing at bilateral level?
Sorry for interruptions. Sorry for interruptions.
Please.
I have a class. In just 1 minute.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Tal, and on behalf of USANAS and the Security Dialogue, thank you for joining us. Really benefited from your insights. We look forward to have you again. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry for the interruption and sorry for need to leave, but exactly now I have another class. I have a class. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Yes, Professor Dalbir, over to you.
Yes. There is a lot of scope between Australia and India regarding the technological cooperation. And this has been already ongoing in a sense, because the two countries have signed the Memorandum of Understanding. There have been institutional linkages. And more important is that there is Australia-India Council. And Australia-India Council each year provides the grants in millions of dollars. I mean, if someone is interested among our audience, is interested in applying for Australia-India relations in the technological sector or in other related issues, terrorism, counter-terrorism and other issues, the grant is open now. And the last date for submission of the application is 4th of February 2022. So there are around 3 more weeks to lodge an application. So there is the Australia-India Council, and through the Australia-India Council, the grants are being provided and technological cooperation has been ongoing. That is through the government to government. In addition to that, the several Australian institutions have entered into bilateral agreements with the Indian institutions. And such as there are several projects that are there ongoing, but also there is one Arch India. We launched it on 15th of August this year. That is initiated by University of Melbourne. Arch India website, if you go, there is a further scope for cooperation between the two countries and between the academic institutions, because there is a good provision is that there is a provision for mentorship. If any of the students or faculty member wants to visit Australia, or from Australia they want to visit India, then there is a mentoring provision is there. You can contact a mentor, and that mentor will guide you that what are the requirements, what can be the possible topics for collaboration, and how the students or faculty members from India can come to visit Australia, and from Australia they can visit to India. And also there is a big list of institutions that finance and provide grants for the visits to the two countries. So there are scope. Australia and India are coming closer. There are a number of grants available. Sometimes there are no candidates to apply for those grants. It has gone to that level. So there are provisions, and these are further expanding as the two countries are coming closer.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks. It's very informative, interesting. The last question, I think that's to address to Mr. Abhinav. So you talk about the many some of the cadres of some mainstream political parties, and also mentioned about some professors who has been who was is a university professor. There was a question regarding the students, the Kashmiri students who are studying in outside Jammu and Kashmir. How vulnerable are they in terms of becoming as a middleman in or is there any cases is there any cases or such cases that they been used or involved in such activities, part of this terror network?
Thank you so much. It's a very important question. I would say for me, it's the most important question. I think we need to have a very nuanced take on this subject. Okay? First of all, let me tell you at the outset that Kashmiri people by temperament, they're not meant for suicide bombing or all kinds of terrorist groups and activities and all. And I have evidence to show that. Like when ISIS was recruiting people, it wasn't Kashmir which provided a single militant to ISIS in Syria and all. Okay, I mean, maybe people who were in Pakistan of Pak region they joined, but from Kashmir hardly anyone joined. No one joined. Okay, it was Kerala which provided the largest number of foreign fighters to ISIS. So especially when Kashmiri students visit other parts of India, the other college for their higher education, I think we should have a generous and a more liberal attitude. We should try to accommodate them. Certainly, I mean, they come from a specific background. So expecting the standards of nationalism, which are prevalent in the routine mainland India, like the northern India, or like Rajasthan or Gujarat, okay, from them will be slightly difficult. But I feel that we should certainly try to accommodate them. We should try to like integrate them with the mainstream India, and that's what Prime Minister Modi has been trying. The entire philosophy behind the abrogation of Article 370 is that the Kashmir should be mingled with India. Kashmir has to be with India. I mean, it's so shocking and surprising that it's difficult. There is no railway line from Delhi to Srinagar now. It's being constructed. It takes otherwise, because of the road situation and all, it takes 2 to 3 days. Yeah. So it has to be brought into the mainstream fold of India, and that's what we can do. We can accept Kashmiri people. Certainly, I mean, if there are issues where you have clear terror linkages or if suspicious activity is found out, then it has to be reported to the police and investigative agencies. They can take care of that. But so far, I don't think I have come across any case where, I mean, Kashmiri students studying in the other parts of India have indulged in any sort of I mean, the overtly or covertly terror activity. Not to my knowledge. Certainly, Mannan Wani was pursuing a PhD at Aligarh University, but then he came to Kashmir and then he announced that he would join militancy. I mean, it hardly had any impact on the other states of India. He did not indulge in any terror activity in the other parts of India. Certainly, I mean, even those students studying in the other parts of India, they do nurture some kind of, I would say, anti-India sentiments, which is, I mean, I think it's quite natural because they come from a background where that's the dominant narrative. If you go to Kashmir, North Kashmir, South Kashmir, Central Kashmir, the narrative is Briticism. So they're coming from that background. So whenever we are talking to them or whenever we are trying to judge them, we have to keep that in mind. And our idea should be to integrate them with the Indian democracy, Indian liberal culture. And I'm sure they do appreciate that. Like these days, a lot of investment is coming to Kashmir, and I get to hear a lot of great feedback from the young students who are very excited and enthusiastic about the job opportunities which are going to come to Kashmir.
Yeah, thanks. The one last question, this is from my side. I'm very curious since you have raised this issue of cross-border trade, the trade that's sort of a unique, which is a barter trade. It was stopped, I think, in 2017, right?
2019,
yeah, 19 or yeah.
I think 19, yes.
Yeah,
After
19,
the Pulwama, they banned Jamaat-e-Islami and stopped
they stopped it.
LOC.
They stopped it.
Yes, yes.
Is there any because I was closely following that cross-border trade. In fact, some of the tractors, I was part of that, access to that. One of the journalists from the Kashmir, Rising Kashmir, Sujat, lost his life, and he was also actively involved in that cross-border civil society movement since way back in 2009. Is there any data which suggests that the post ban of this cross-border trade, is there any reduction on the fall of the terror funding which comes to the valley? Anyways, you banned Jamaat is banned, and the accounts been frozen and monitored. Because what I find is that there are two ways. Of course, this has been exploited, although it was started with a goodwill, a good gesture by Manmohan Singh government, and definitely the PDP has a stake in that because that's their vote bank. The constituency is there, so they had a heavy political stake in terms of getting votes from those regions. So they were very much involved, even personally involved in some of these talks. But there are some things that we don't have enough scanning mechanism at the points like Chakanda Bagh and these areas where the trucks coming from there, we don't have enough scanning machines to scan those entire trucks. That's one of the lacuna. And obviously, whatever the goodwill gestures that we do with Pakistan, being it a cross-border trade or even this Kartarpur corridor, there is always an element that deep state wants to exploit for their own vested interest. That is also there. So this is my little submission.
Thank you. Do I have to answer anything? Is there a question?
If you wanted to reflect on that, yeah.
Can you just summarize the question?
The question is that, is there any data which shows that after this ban on trade, there is some sort of impact in terms of terror, the funds flow into the valley?
Once again, when you use the word data, it really,
no, not even data, just like just like some figures, some ideas,
actually,
some
because during my research, it's a major problem in the Indian setup, because the agencies, they never reveal any data. Most of the data collected is kept by the state intelligence and the central intelligence agencies. So they would not reveal, but yes, during my interviews with the very senior officers, those are off the record interviews when I cannot quote their names.
Yeah.
Certainly there was, huge amounts of data to prove that a lot has come down. And you can see some of these things directly, we cannot establish the link. But if you see, there has been no major massive unrest like the post-Burhan unrest in Kashmir, even after the abrogation of Article 370. The stone pelting has drastically come down. And even for the terror groups also, they're really shortage. They are facing big shortage of funds. They're facing shortage of weaponry. So that's, I mean, these are the things which have happened after the NIA got into action, and we really cracked down on some of these funding mechanisms like LOC trade and all. They face huge problem, like, especially how to pay to the OGWs and informers, because all this was, I got to know that between, since the weaponry was coming from through this LOC trade, especially they used to hide it under the trucks.
Yep.
And the scanner point which you raised, it's very valid, because I was, once I was meeting the DC of Baramulla, and he said the same thing, sir, we don't have a scanner, what to do about that?
Yeah, exactly.
So this weaponry was coming. Now after the LOC trade ban, this stopped. So now, after that, they were trying to find, they were basically getting in touch with the militants of 1990s, because in 1990s, huge amounts of weapons came. And the people who abandoned militancy, some of them, they hid those weapons, they, at some places, like, they dug them in some fields or something like that. So now, the recent past, the terror group, especially after the abrogation of Article 370, they were facing huge pressure from Pakistan to orchestrate a major terror violence or some kind of an civil unrest. So, but they were desperately needing weapons. So they were trying to get in touch with the old militants and just to find out those old caches of weapons, but not to, I mean, they didn't get much success in that. So this shows that banning LOC trade has dealt a major
Significant
blow
impact.
to
Yeah, exactly.
weapon. Yes.
Thank you so much. We really look forward to see your book, and very eager to see it. It will be a unique in terms of there's so many books written on Kashmir, but this will be a very interesting and unique book in that account, and it will really help the academia and the students and scholars, even the practitioners, to understand the terror financing in Indian context, particularly in J&K. Thank you very much, and I would like to thank all the panelists, starting from Professor Dalbir, who has joined from Australia. Thank you very much for being with us, and Mr. Abhinav and Professor Tal. Thank you all. Now I hand over this panel to the host, Akshay, for play that video, the presentation of, yep, yes.
Of terrorism.
Yeah. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Pandya, for inviting me to this very important conference. And Usana's foundation has been doing a marvelous job for the last 2 years since we have been associated. I have been really impressed with the length and breadth of subjects that Usana's foundation has been dealing with. And this Maharana Pratap lecture series is a very good initiative. I think it brings together certain personalities which we don't come to hear in the other conferences that are held in India. It is important that we get various voices, and I'll be frank that not the same voices every year. And this is a very pertinent topic, the terror financing. I mean, this is probably the most the oxygen that keeps terrorism alive. I mean, and if financing is never addressed, terrorism will never be addressed. And terror financing I'll expand the horizon, and I'll between South Asia and West Asia and North Africa, and also now as we see as the developments unfold in Central Asia, particularly in Kazakhstan. Financing of terrorism is probably the biggest challenge. I would say bigger challenge than the terror ideology itself, because if ideology can only thrive if there is financing. And as we had seen between 2014 and 2018, 19, I would say between 2014 and 2018, the way the Islamic State, ISIL and ISIS took over swaths of territory in Iraq, in Syria, and was threatening various other countries in that part of the world. And also their various sister groups which claim allegiance to them in parts of North Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa. They can only survive through financing. This financing is through organized way, like the drug trafficking or state support, and we are clear now that who all supported at the ISIS at that point of time. There are various theories, of course. Because of the sensitivity, people don't want to touch about it, but there are certain things which are very clear, that who initially founded the idea of this group and how it came into being and how it was counter to another ideology within a particular religion. I mean, there are sectoral issues, and then there are funding for the sects from the rich states. And in South Asia, in particularly, terror has been pursued as an instrument of state policy by Pakistan, and there are no qualms about it. I mean, I have no qualms about it, and in naming the country, because it has been pursued as an instrument of state policy. So there has been no dearth of funding from Rawalpindi and ISI, and this continues unabated today, since it has been started in the 80s, first in Punjab and then in Kashmir. And when we saw between 2004 to 2008, spate of terror attacks, through the various sleeper cells in India and through SIMI. And fortunately, SIMI was neutralized from down below. It is important to reach out to the various community leaders in dissuading the misguided youth, but simultaneously it is very important to control the finances, the terror finances. Now in India's neighborhood, if we look a little ahead of Pakistan in Afghanistan, I know Taliban could sustain, and Taliban could make a comeback, not just because there was a frustration and disenchantment with 20 years of rule by leaders who didn't have any roots and were exported from abroad, but was also because of the finance that Taliban could gather. There is a state finance, and there is also why Taliban called, don't want to deal with drugs, but the drug money, the narco smuggling gives a big revenue to Taliban to run their finance. But that is not helping them in any way to run the country, and we see that the precarious economic situation that Afghanistan today faces. If we rewind a couple of years back in Sri Lanka, there was a major Easter bombings in 2019, which actually rattled Sri Lanka. It was as heinous as the probably crimes committed by LTT earlier. So it is clear that this terror financing had come probably partly from a state and also partly from groups which has operated as far as North Africa, and there is a drug mafia which is operating between Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Pakistan, and there's this syndicate funds terrorism. So it's very, very important to nip it in the bud and to get to the root, which is financing. In the G20, India has repeatedly raised these issues in the last couple of years under the current government on the issue of controlling or eliminating or neutralizing the finances or the roots of terror. FATF has been an effective tool as far as sending messages to the country in terms of terror finances, and we see Pakistan continues to be in the grey list and could have well been into blacklist by now had it not been initially for Malaysia and supported by Turkey and Pakistan, and it is still bailed out whenever Pakistan faces a situation of being blacklisted. It is still bailed out by China, Turkey, and earlier Malaysia. China should itself see the writing on the wall. For today, Pakistan remains an ally to China to pursue its goal in South Asia, but it should read the writing on the wall. If radical ideas and fueled by state supports spread, it can tomorrow spread beyond Pakistan. Then it will be difficult for China to control the situation in Xinjiang. As we currently see the situation unfolding in Central Asia, and particularly Kazakhstan, which came as a shock to all of us, given the nature of political culture there, and that even the state's security agencies failed to, detect this kind of, the sleeper cells. It's the sleeper cells which are most dangerous, as we can see today in a state like Kazakhstan, which is a very liberal state. In the last 2 years, they have undertaken huge political reforms, where people are using social media very rampantly. Today telecom service is open to everybody, including foreigners. So these all feed into creating an atmosphere the radicals are taking over. They're in fact challenging the state power, and they were almost on the verge of a regime change in Kazakhstan. Of course, there was some local discontent, but they were on the verge of regime change. So this has the roots in the finances of the radicals, and I I'm frustrated and I'm disgusted to see that how this has continued unabated in not only in territories like Afghanistan, where the state economy is in shambles, but also in places where I mean there are proper security structure, and they have not been able to detect it, and probably somewhere soft pedal certain ideologies, soft peddling ideologies, going soft peddling, giving space to some conservatism doesn't really help in the long run. It actually threatens the constitutional order. I would briefly, towards as I end my brief intervention, I would like to also touch upon on our eastern neighbor in Bangladesh, where Jamaat-e-Islami for many years, has been able to sustain themselves because it has funding from the banks. It gets funding from expats. It has also get funding from some earlier used to get fund from states. It has got funding, unabated funding from Pakistan. It has continued in an uninterrupted way. So it's an example of how a terror and extremist group have been able to camouflage itself as Islamist, and a moderate Islamic force, as what the US calls, and I would hold US responsible to a large extent, in particularly in shielding Jamaat-e-Islami, and the way they have been able to create, groups, smaller groups, and which have also threatened, constitutional order in Bangladesh. Indonesia has a syncretic culture and have been able to control, but all states should be very cautious, in addressing these issues. So it is not just India's problem. If somebody thinks that it is just a problem between India and Pakistan, it's just India's, that India is a country which is continuously raising these issues of state-sponsored terrorism. It is a big, there are state-sponsored terrorism in various parts of the world, and that those state-sponsored terrorism, some of them by very rich countries, and these countries are trying to export an ideology. One should try to see this through, and try to, to curb the ambitions of countries. Some countries are really punching above their weight, and because they have earned huge revenues from natural resources, and are trying to bankroll terrorism. It's not just the non-state actors. There are state actors. The non-state actors survive because there are state actors, and there is a very organized terror financing which is going on, and groups from Pakistani Tablighi Jamaat to Hizb ut-Tahrir to ISIS, which has taken shape in the various sister organizations in Africa now, will emerge as a big headache for most of the continents on this earth. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dipanjan, for making this wonderful presentation. I have a few questions for you. So, especially after the US withdrawal, we see that, all those nasty designs of spreading radicalism and extremism in Central Asia are back in place, and that was always Russia's main concern and worry. So, especially after the recent developments in Kazakhstan, and given the old Deobandi roots and network and the spread in the Central Asia, do you feel that this whole area will emerge as a new terror financing route network, or some kind of some kind of a hub, okay, for the global terror business? And once again, Turkey, just once again, Turkey also has ethnic ties with the people there, and it's a dream of the Erdogan to just have a greater Turkic, region in the sphere of influence, and their links with the jihadist groups are well known. So, given those things, how do you see all these events in future?
I think as I've also pointed out in my article, which has been published today, there are Turkish radicals which who have been in club with the extremists from Afpak region in fueling this, taking advantage of some discontent in in Central Asia's biggest country. It is a real danger. That's what I think Moscow has pointed out from ever since Taliban came, and some of the Central Asian countries as well. And that was in the backdrop that India had organized the India, Russia, Iran, Central Asia NSA dialogue in Delhi. The foreign ministers meeting after that followed it. I mean, also focused on that. So it's a big worry for the Central Asian states as well as for Russia in terms of the the spread of this ideology from Afghanistan with support from some would say Pindi Shura. I mean, and we all know Pakistan's links with Turkey. I mean, there are no doubts about it. And that Erdogan's dream of creating a soft empire now. I mean, in terms of he may not probably create a physically Ottoman Empire, but there are serious challenges to this. I feel as I understand, the commentators in Moscow have been trying to talk about it in the last few days, both in the Russian Foreign Ministry think tank as well as in other think tanks about how these. I mean, they are worried about also the designs of certain states with cultural links in Central Asia, because this is the belly of Russia. And today, if it's in Kazakhstan, tomorrow it will be in Russian Caucasus. Day after tomorrow, it will be in Europe. I mean, there are already. I mean, you already faced that. Western Europe and Central Europe has been immune, but we can't, really. I mean, so in that regard, I believe the step by CSTO was very timely, and I think the Central Asian and Eurasian states and India should now work together to address this issue on a war footing.
Thank you. One last question for you. So, have you come across any kind of linkages in the context of terror financing between the Tablighi Jamaat and other Deobandi groups in India and the radical extremist groups? And if yes, do the intelligence agencies know about it? How effective is their strategy to counter that? Would you throw some light on that?
I would not like to paint Indian Tablighi Jamaat into that. It has had a different role compared to the Tablighis of, say, Saudi Arabia or even in Pakistan, and even Tablighis in some parts of Central Asia which have been banned. I think the focus is on the activities of more of the Pakistan Tablighi Jamaat. That's what I understand is probably trying to justify their exist. Even after Saudi Arabia banned Tablighi Jamaat recently, it was Pakistan and which passed a resolution backing Tablighi Jamaat in Pakistan. I mean, we now this will be a new kind of I mean, I would also call it in some kind of a sleeper cell, which will be the new front for Pakistan to now export this kind of idea. It has been their dream. Of course, they will say, oh, no, we are a country, multi-religion country, but that's what they wanted to. They want to bring this kind of export this to their next door, which is now it has been Afghanistan. Tomorrow they want to change the character in Central Asia. It is difficult. They have a different lifestyle culture. All the countries in Central Asia, including Azerbaijan, have diplomatic ties with Israel. I mean, so their outlook is different compared to many other countries. So it is not easy, but to penetrate. But definitely, Tablighi Jamaat in Pakistan with state support are making efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today, and hope to see you in our future sessions also. Thank you.
Yeah.
Namaskar. So with this, we come to the end of the evening session of our first day of Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. And once again, extending a very, very warm thanks to all the participants and our esteemed panelists and moderators, Dr. Jagan, Professor Pavel, Dr. Dalbir, Ahlawat, and Dipanjan ji, who is not here, and all the participants who played an immense role in joining this event and making this a great success. And also big thanks to my team, very hardworking and brilliant team, Akshay, Preeti, Lavanya, Mehak, Vedika, and Meher. Thank you very much.